Born March 24th, 1925, W. Glenn Dennis worked as the mortician at the Ballard Funeral Home, who had the military contract for the Air Force's body post-mortem preparation. The interview you're about to see was done by the Department of Defense on November 19th, 1990. Mr. Dennis recounts his testimony as a first-hand witness to the events at Roswell Army Air Force Hospital concerning recovered alien bodies from the crash in Roswell, New Mexico, July 8, 1947.
Yeah.
By what they've read and seen since. Describing essentially what they remember.
Yeah.
It's just a nice part of the world. It really is. Yeah.
Everybody's so helpful.
Hang on now. Let's see how our Tinker Toys are all put together here. Have we got any kind of an audio line?
Yeah, if you just want to give me a little bit of...
Glenn, would you just say a couple things? Okay, first of all, the phone was ringing, right?
Okay, the way I became involved in this was started out in the early afternoon, around probably 1:30 in the afternoon, and I received a telephone call from the mortuary officer out at the Walker Air Force Base, Army Airfield Base, and he was inquiring about what would be the smallest possible casket that we could get that would be hermetically sealed. And at that time, I know that we had used like the 4 feet and caskets. We had used those before, but I thought they also made them in a 3/6. So, he wanted to know if we had any in stock, and I said no, but if I can make a call to Amarillo, I can have them in, by 7 o'clock the next morning on the truck. So he said, I'll get back to you. And that was the first contact that I had with the base.
And then what?
Then he called back, probably 45 minutes or so later. And he said, I need to ask you some more questions. He said, in case something like this should happen, he said, we need to know what the preparation, what your preparations are for the bodies that had been laying out in the elements, And he said, we need to know also what if your treatments of the bodies are the remains, what could you do to them, and if your treatments, would it change any of the chemical breakdown of the tissues, the blood? Would it make a difference? And I said, I thought probably it would. And I said, of course, he knew exactly how we would treat those bodies because we have an outline from them and what we really have to do. I think he already at that point knew exactly what we would have to do.
Did he disclose to you what he had?
No, I told him. I said, if you have a problem, if you want, if you have something you don't really know what to do about it, let me come out, and I'll, try to help you do whatever you want to do. And he said,
okay.
And he said, no. He said,
let's just back up just a minute there. Let's start again with, you were saying that you told him that you can come out and take care of what he had, right?
Yeah.
Why don't you pick it up from that point again?
So, anyway, he said, well, we don't really have anything. He said, we're sitting here thinking in case we should get involved in something like this, what would be our preparation? Should we do? Then I went through, I said, do you really want to know how we would do it? Well, yes, we would like to know. So that's when I explained to him that we would have the vats that we would fill up with formaldehyde solution with water, and we put the bodies in them, let them stay there for 24 hours, and then take them out. And then we would pack the bodies in, would be a sawdust and really a lime, what we would pack them in, then wrap them in the plastic. That's bodies that were badly decomposed. If there was tissue, deep tissue, we would have to do it hypodermically with needles to get to the deep tissue. Then we would have to aspirate the cavities if the cavities hadn't already ruptured, and then put some cavity fluid in those. I said that's, kind of normal procedure.
Now, at one point, you finally offered to take care of it for them.
Well, I offered 2-3 times, yeah.
Can you review what that conversation at that point?
You mean when I offered to take care of them?
Yeah.
He said, well, we don't really, right at this time, we don't really need your assistant. But he said, in case something like this should happen, then he said we would be prepared and we would know what to do. Mm-hmm. Then we got back onto the subject of maybe not damaging any of the chemicals, compounds or anything with the bodies or, tissues, whatever. Because and they wanted, how would you pick bodies up like that, and what would you do not to contaminate any of it?
Didn't this begin to seem a little strange to you at that point?
Well, I thought maybe what happened, they might have had a VIP or, some officer and something that happened. They didn't want, wanted to keep it quiet, and they probably wanted to do it themselves, not be involved with the civilian businesses or anything.
So, after these conversations, you were curious, and you went on out to the base, as I understand it. Can you review that?
Well, no, I didn't go out to the base. Yeah, I was curious, but I didn't go out to the base, and probably a couple hours later, and I'd got an emergency call. There was an airman that was injured in an accident, and I took the airman to the base. He rode in the ambulance with me, and I took him out to the emergency room. And that's the way I became really involved out the base. I didn't go out just because I was curious.
Give me the sequence from the time you picked up the airman and just describe to me.
Well, when I got the call, I left the funeral home and the ambulance went to the scene of the accident, picked the airman up. I did not place him on a stretcher because he had a head injury in the nose. I think his nose was fractured. So I did some minor first aid, and then he sat in the front seat with me all the way to the base. When we got to the base, then he walked into the emergency room. I didn't have to take him in. They didn't bring out a gurney or anything. He just walked in on his own. Then I never did see him after that. Then I had this friend that I wanted to talk to and see. This is a lieutenant nurse that I knew quite well, that had only been there approximately, only been commissioned and been out to sign. This was her first assignment out to the air base. And I wanted to talk to her, and so I was going down the hall, and first thing, the lieutenant that I wanted to see was coming out of one room, going across the hall to the other, and she noticed it was me. She said, "How did you get in here, and what are you doing in here?" And she said, "You better get out in a hurry." She said, "You're going to get in a lot of trouble." She said, "Would you please leave and get out of here in a hurry?" And then I turned around, and she went on into the other room. Then in about the time I turned around, there was another officer said, "Hey, wait a minute." And I said, "Looks like you had a crash." He said, "I see there's some, in the ambulances out there, I see a lot of wrecking." I said, "Where was the crash?" And he said, "There wasn't any crash." And he said, "Just wait a minute." And then he said, "Wait a minute." And I, stood there for a minute. And he turned around, and evidently he must have waited for somebody else to come out, because there was another officer coming out. He said, "This man says there was a crash out at the base." He said he wanted to know he was inquiring about our crash. And this was when I encountered, he was a red-headed officer, and very nasty, very rough. He said, "You did not see any crash. There was not any crash." And he said, "You get the hell out of here, and you didn't see anything, and you don't talk to anybody." He said, "You're going to get in a hell of a lot of trouble." And I said, "Look, I'm a civilian. There isn't a damn thing you can do to me about it." He said, "No, but somebody might be picking your bones out of the sand." That's when he made the remark there. Then there was a black sergeant that was standing beside him. And he said, yeah, but he would make better dog food for our dogs. Of course, I didn't understand that, but my father happened to be an old trapper and for a hobby and everything. And I said, my father uses guys like you for bait in these coyote traps. And then there was 2 MPs that joined me right on, took me outside, and each holding me by my elbows, and they escorted me out to back to the ambulance and followed me all the way back to the funeral home.
Now, as you were entering the hospital, you saw something in 3 trucks.
Yeah, because usually where I parked, there was 3 field ambulances parked in the area where I usually park, where we back up to the ramps. So I just pulled up to the side in front of those and parked out in the front, and the airman and I got out and walked in. So when I got up, went up the steps and up the ramp, and I was walking, going into the emergency room, I noticed that the doors were open, but what was odd about it, there was an MP standing beside each one of the vehicles in the back, just standing there. And the doors were open. Naturally, I was curious, and, I just happened to look in. That's when I saw some debris that looked like parts of a plane or something that they hadn't had a crash. Because I've seen them do this a lot of times, bring in pieces and the old ambulances in.
Can you describe the debris?
Yeah, I noticed in 2 of the ambulances there was some debris that was probably 2.5 to 3 feet, long and probably high, that was propped up on the side of the ambulance there. They were kind of in the shape of maybe like a half a canoe. They were like the front part of a canoe. And, it looked like it might be aluminum, but it looked more like the metal looked more like stainless steel that had been heated. It was blue, kind of a bluish tint to it. But what was odd about it, it looked like around the curved part in the front of the canoe, there was some designs or something. It kind of reminded me of maybe some Egyptian signs or whatever. And it was probably about 3 inches in high, and probably the length of what the wreckage I saw, it looked like it was the length. And the same thing was in the other ambulance too. I mean, I saw practically the same thing. The pieces that were practically the same size, and the insignias looked like whatever that might be was part of the wreckage.
How did your friend feel about what she saw?
Well, I didn't know really until the next day. And I called out. I kept trying to get a hold of her because naturally I was curious and I wanted to know what was going on. And so I called out the next day, and then probably around 11:30, she said, I know you've been trying to get a hold of me, but I haven't been available. And she said, why don't you meet me at the officers club? If you have time, meet at the officers club and we'll have lunch, and I want to talk to you. And the funeral home we had at that time, we had some of the businesses there had an associate membership to the officers club. And our funeral home had that membership, and also had a card to identify myself and what business that I was, associated with. So I had no problem. One time I'd go to base, all I had to do, a lot of times if it was in the evening, I'd have to stop and sign a visitor's and get a visitor's pass and then turn it in when I left. But it was no problem going out there. So I went on out and met her. Beg your pardon?
Tell me about lunch.
Well, we, both ordered. I'm not sure, remember what we ordered, but it was just a light lunch. But she was so upset. She looked like she was, in shock, is what she really talked like and looked like. And she said, I said, well, I was just curious. The only reason I want to talk to you, I was curious on what happened. And she said, well, you won't believe it. And she says, I don't believe it either. But she said, I got in a lot of trouble on this thing. I'm not real sure about this. But she said, then she pulled out of a little purse or little pocketbook, whatever she had there. she gave me a little diagram that she had drawn some figures of some arms and face and so on. She told me that this is what, was what was in those, that it was a crash. It wasn't an airplane, but they didn't know what it was at that time.
These were bodies.
Yeah, but she said we have 3 bodies. That there was 3 bodies. She said 2 of them were very mutilated. One looked like it might have walked out, or that it, might have lived a little while. And she explained they were like 3.5 feet to 4 feet tall. The 2 of the bodies were you couldn't identify much because they were practically destroyed, and it looked like maybe that they might have been a predatory animal or something might have been doing some damage on the bodies too.
How did she describe their head and their hands?
Well, she said the head, and then the little drawings that I had, the way she explained it and the way she drew it, that the heads were somewhat larger than a human heads. The hands were long, no thumbs. It was just the long, very delicate fingers at the end of on the underside at the tip of each fingers was a pad-like, maybe a little pad, but it looked like the skin had maybe little suction, like the little suction cups on those. On the, no fingernails on the hands. The head, the lips were just a long, narrow, more or less, not full lips like we would have in most of our people, but very fine lined, very fine lips. There was no teeth. That was the inside of the mouth. It was kind of like a real, a gums, or maybe it was, she said to explain it, it was almost as hard as if it was rawhide, maybe, at that. The ears, there was only 2 small orifices on each side of the head with, looked like a couple of small lobes that might, some way that might cover both of those. But there was not a protruding ear. And also that the nose, there was only 2 small orifices in the nose. There was really no nose that was convex. It was all just flush with the face.
Was she emotional about all this?
Very much so. Very emotional. She would have to stop and drink water every once in a while, and also she never touched a meal at all the time we were talking in an hour and a half that we were there. She never touched her meal.
Any other demonstrations of emotion? Indications of how she was upset?
Well, just, every once in a while she'd go like this, and wringing her hands, and she said it was the most I've never been so horrified in my life. I've never seen anything so gruesome in my life. I've never smelt anything that smelt worse in my life. And she told me that when I saw her, she was leaving the room to go to the bathroom because she was deathly ill and was going to throw up.
Did she recognize any of the doctors by the examining the body?
She told me, she said, I asked her that question, which of the doctors, and she said, I don't know that I knew them, and that was her answer. So, but she said she walked in the room and they said, hey, we need you, you need to help us. And that was the way she became involved in it. And then she got ill. The doctors also became very ill. They would have to do a little examination, then they'd have to leave and go sit down, and then they would come back and do a little bit more. It was that bad.
After your conversation with her at lunch, can you describe what happened there? How you were unable to see her again, and how you learned the...
Well, yeah, we'd visited a while, and then I had to get back to the funeral home, go back to work, but then I never did see her after that. And I called out the next day to see how she was feeling, and they told me that she wasn't available. Then I wouldn't be available that day. I called the next day, and they told me that she'd been transferred. And it was rather odd because she'd only been at the base less than 3 months. That was her on commission less than 3 months.